Ever since the launch of Baldur's Gate 3, Larian Studios has proved why they are a studio to be trusted over and over again. They communicate with the fan base, they work hard on fixing bugs and adding new content to Baldur's Gate 3, they don't add unnecessary microtransactions to the game, and just release a full product for which you paid full price for. They don't try to insert live service components into a game that is literally just a single player game. And by doing all of this, they have built a reputation that will most likely last for many, many, many years. And they've essentially become the pinnacle of what a game studio is supposed to be and what it can represent. Now, you might remember that Swen, Vincke, the CEO of Larian, relatively recently had a speech on an award show for other developers. And during this speech, Swen quite literally slammed the practices that a lot of publishers and studios continue with in this day and age. Here's a short clip of what he said, just to refresh your memory.
Walking here, I would say, you gotta do something in case you win something, and I didn't have anything. And then the speeches here have been so good and basically stole my thunder of the things I wanted to talk about. So about stopping war and about stopping the greed, which has been fucking this thing up for so long, ever since I started, ever since I've been fighting with publishers my entire life. So it's like, and I keep on seeing, I keep on seeing the same mistakes over and over and over, and it's always the quarterly profits. The only thing that matters is the numbers, and then you fire everybody. And then, like, next year, you're going to see, shit, I'm out of developers, and you're going to start hiring people again, and then you do acquisitions, and then you put them in the same loop again, and it's just been broken and broken and broken. You don't have to. You just can make reserves, slow down a little bit, slow down on the greed, be resilient, take care of the people, don't lose the institutional knowledge that's been built up in all of those people that you lose every single time, so that you have to go through the same cycle over and over and over. Right? So, because it really pisses me off. Anyway.
Now, obviously, for anyone who has been following this channel or has been following Larian or Baldur's Gate 3 news for a while, you'll know just how based Larian is and just what a boss Swen Vincke is. But you see, Swen Vincke is not the only one from Larian who has been speaking out about these issues plaguing the gaming industry. Because you see, Michael Douse, who is the director of publishing at Larian Studios, has spoken quite a bit about the industry. And recently he had an interview with Stephen Totillo from Game Files. And in this interview, Michael Douse does not mince his words at all. Now, unfortunately, the original article is paywalled, but what IGN did here is that they put together a pretty good summary of the interview. And here we can see it says on the title, Baldur's Gate 3 dev Larian's publishing director calls games industry layoffs an avoidable fuck up, which is something that essentially Swen Vincke spoke about during the Game Developers Conference. Isaiah Colbert here from IGN gives some examples. Here, for example, we have Nintendo, who started announcing layoffs very recently. Then, of course, we had Sony laying off 900 staff, and this was in February. And then back in January, we had Microsoft, who laid off more than 1,900 staff. And even before that, this list just goes on, and I'm not even sure of how many people have been laid off so far, but it's upwards of 10 to 20,000 people in the gaming industry in a relatively short time, sort of like in the past year or so. Now, in this interview, Michael likened these gigantic publishers and gaming companies to massive oil tankers, and that they're all just basically one big oil tanker that's trying to steer towards success. And of course, should one of these gaming companies fail to plan accordingly, as it says here, you will most likely have layoffs. And here, Michael says that this is entirely avoidable, saying, but to prevent these giant operational failures that we call layoffs, they are an avoidable fuck-up. That's really all they are. That's why you see one after the other, because companies are going, well, finally, now we can do this too. We've wanted to do it for ages. Everyone else is, so why don't we? That's really kind of sick. And essentially what he's saying here is that as soon as a big publisher or a big gaming company starts laying off people, you're going to have all the other gaming companies laying off a bunch of people as well. And that's what we've seen here. It's been a domino effect because as soon as someone else starts doing it, everybody else starts thinking that it's fine. Now, of course, there are many reasons usually for when layoffs happen. We, for example, have the war going on over in Ukraine. We have massive inflation, of course. There is the COVID hiring spree where a lot of companies just picked up way too many people at the end of the day, all across the world, across many different industries, not just the gaming industry. And then we also have this AI revolution, this AI boom. We're seeing artists lose their jobs because everything can be AI generated, basically, essentially when it comes to art, writing, and things like that. But what Michael says in this interview is that he is primarily looking at the shareholders, essentially that these gaming companies are trying to please their shareholders to get as much profit as possible. And here IGN points out that this was what Swen Vincke was talking about as well on the acceptance speech, in that you don't have to go on these giant hiring sprees only to fire people en masse. As an example, Swen has often talked about financial reserves, so use money sparingly, which means don't go on giant hiring sprees. Try to retain your talent, try to keep them in your company, because that is also something he's talked about, generational knowledge, institutional knowledge from people who have been at your company for a long time. You want to keep those people. In any case, Michael says layoffs are a very, very complex and nuanced decision. But the idea that it's an inevitability that has to happen, it's just not true. In the article, we see a quote here, being nimble is key. Big companies are not nimble. Again, we're going back to this oil tanker comparison, because at the end of the day, these big gaming companies are essentially that. They have a lot of value in them. They're carrying a bunch of oil, but if they don't land ashore or if they don't get to the goalpost, yeah. The article continues saying Douse credited much of Baldur's Gate 3's achievements, namely maintaining a healthy work environment for its employees, to Larian Studios being a privately owned company unbeholden to shareholders. When asked whether Larian Studios would ever go public, Douse said it might give them more money, but it would be antithetical to the quality part of what we're trying to do. That is something that Larian has talked about so many times, and Swen especially has talked about many times, that he's been trying to hold off publishers as much as possible because he wants Larian to have full autonomy of their own decisions. Michael says so it wouldn't make our games better, it would just make us rushed. If you asked us what Baldur's Gate 3 would look like, how much it would cost, and how it would feel 3 years ago, I wouldn't know. We just took it day by day. As an operation, we created reserves. We scoped up based on what we thought we would need and created reserves and fallbacks just in case we would have to. Luckily, we don't have to. We're just nimble. Being nimble is key. Big companies are not nimble. Again, looking at this specific word here, creating reserves, having financial reserves, so that in case something happens and you need to spend money to solve a specific solution, like in this example where Swen talked about how they had to get a lot of devs out of Ukraine when the war started happening, which probably cost a pretty penny to relocate all the devs. And as far as I know, this is not something that bigger companies tend to do. They just start laying people off because it's more cost effective that way, which is horrible when you really think about it, right? Now, this echoes back to something that Johan Pilestedt was talking about, who is the CEO of Arrowhead Studios, who's made the very extremely successful Helldivers 2, where he said, I want to do a massive shout out to Arrowhead backend engineers. I mean, 4 people 5xing the max of what they designed for in 1 week and are now looking to go beyond. I don't think you can understand what a massive feat this is. It's like tuning a Vespa to compete in F1. He's talking about how they had to really squeeze out as much performance as possible from their servers. And that's all thanks to the knowledge and the understanding and the skill of the people they've had at the company for so long. My buddy Bon here said, I assume one challenge is scaling up for the current numbers, knowing they'll inevitably drop a decent amount to something more manageable, but also realizing it'll surge around content updates and releases. Fun stuff, lol. Pilestedt responded with, the act of overhiring to then do layoffs is a horrible practice and a bad experience for employees. use short-term solutions for short-term problems such as outsourcing, contractors, or limited time agreements. Who would have thought? Again, Pilestedt is echoing what both Michael Douse and Swen Vincke has been talking about all this time, and that it's very important to squeeze as much as you can out of your employees and essentially your funds and your institutional knowledge that you already have, so that you don't have to ruin people's lives by hiring a bunch of people and then firing them soon after. Now, Michael also talked about marketing, and in this article it says passive marketing versus socially resonant communication, and it continues with, while Douse doesn't ascribe to the notion that the video games industry is on the verge of collapse, he does think its traditional methods of marketing on social media websites like Twitter/X are becoming less important. I mean, for Baldur's Gate 3, we didn't really do a lot of marketing. People talk about the bear scene as a big marketing beat. It wasn't. It was a communication, something we decided to do to showcase one extreme of romance in the game, as opposed to the Karlach scene in the restaurant. Douse went on to argue that marketing, while a form of communication, doesn't generate the social resonance online that people want to engage in meaningful conversations over. A game's success is defined by how socially resonant it is, Douse said. It's not defined by a person who decided this game was successful, which is a brilliant thing. Very true. It's all about the word of mouth nowadays, and you're seeing this more and more. We have, for example, Palworld, right, which reached 19 million total players in less than 2 weeks after launch. That's absolutely crazy. That's insane. But we also have Helldivers 2 that also had massive success, and while these games had some marketing, most of it was just word of mouth. People loved these games because of what they provided. As an example here, Douse drew parallel to Baldur's Gate 3's critical and commercial success. Despite being a fucking CRPG, investors would have otherwise never taken a chance on to the meteoric success of Palworld, of course, which reached 19 million total players in 2 weeks after launch, as I mentioned. To which Michael said, they took a bunch of mechanics they knew people liked, made a game that was unbothered by what a game should be, and they gave it directly to players who decided to buy it. That's really effing simple. It's not rocket science, he said. The analysts are confused because they didn't see it coming and they want basic data sets and predictability. They're going to be confused a lot in the future. Me too. I like being confused. We work best in chaos. Now, shout out to Isaiah Colbert for writing this article. But what I really love about this and what it shows is that both Michael and Swen, and essentially the entirety of Larian, are fully prepared for what the future of gaming looks like. They understand players. They understand their players because they are players and gamers themselves. Swen, for example, understands what it is that his fans want out of their games. And that's what they do. They just make the games that people want from them. And because they're retaining all the talent, most of the talent as far as I know, with the company, and they're not laying people off all the time, and they have these financial reserves, especially after the success of Baldur's Gate 3, like they gotta have some giant reserves now, which is great because the next game is essentially gonna be bigger than what Baldur's Gate 3 was, according to Swen Vincke. But that'll have to do it for today. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more. Mr. Holton signing out.